So before I start the lecture, the last presidential debate is Thursday. If you watch some of the debates or as much of it as you can tolerate, and you write something up, you can get extra credit for that. They have said that they will be muting the microphones of the person whose turn it is not to speak, so this should be hopefully a little better compared to the last debate. I say hopefully, but you know. The debate is Thursday night, I believe, 7:30 p.m. our time. I'll have to double check. But again, if you watch the debate and you write something up, you can get extra credit. Okay. Okay. So we're going to wrap our discussion on elections today. We're going to talk about money, reasons why people vote the way they do, and recent elections. Before we start on that, last class I had mentioned the role of political action committees and what's called 527 Act. The 527 Act is run by an interest group and is not affiliated with a campaign. So there was one that was released recently that I thought was really interesting for a couple of reasons. So I want to go ahead and show you all this particular political ad.
Imagine a young girl looking in the mirror, searching for role models. When she watches.
You asked a lot of stupid questions.
Blonde.
The monster that was on stage, Mike Pence, who destroyed her last night by the That's okay, I know you never do.
I'm sorry? Harass.
Coming out of her, wherever,
Insulted.
I'm looking right in the fat ugly face of her.
The doctors are listening, absorbing that message. I imagine a different future for her. The president who doesn't just chooses one, his right hand woman. Strong. A woman with passion. A woman enough to take on. She embodies it. Imagine that source. And her actions on November 3rd. She sees. Change. Look at her. The woman is responsible for the content of this.
So you see where it says not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. Political action groups are required to put that in the ad to show it's not an actual official campaign ad. So what do you guys think? What do you think of that particular? Okay. Right. So it's interesting for two reasons. One, we're talking about vote for the next generation, right? Don't vote for you, vote for them. And two, the Lincoln Project is actually a Republican super PAC. They usually endorse Republican candidates. So this time, the fact that they're endorsing a Democrat instead is unusual. Usually you don't see them cross party lines. For a Republican interest group to be endorsing a Democrat, that's pretty rare. We don't usually see that happening in an election. So like I said, we're going to wrap up chapter 10. We're going to talk about money, reasons people vote, and of course, the recent elections. We talked last time about primaries and caucuses, campaign staff, and so on. Of course, one of the biggest factors in elections is money. Right? The more money you have, the better your odds of winning. And you have to raise millions of dollars especially at the presidential level, to fund your staff, right? You have to pay your campaign manager, you have to pay your treasurer, your state coordinators, you have to fund the polling, and you have to fund ads. A direct mailer campaign where they send out a flyer can cost at least $1 million in a major city for the mailing list, the printing, and the posting. There's a lot of money that goes into elections. As individuals, we are limited in how much we can donate to a candidate. The maximum amount we can give is $2,700. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot on the face of it. However, there's no restriction on how many candidates you can donate to. If you're Bill Gates, you could donate $2,700 to 100 candidates, 1,000 candidates, 2,000 candidates, right? You're only restricted in how much you can give, not how many people you can donate to. Of course, campaigns can't survive on individual contributions. They need to raise mega money. This is where political action committees come into play. And these are the organizations that can raise hundreds of millions of dollars. They represent corporations like Amazon, Exxon, or Walmart. They represent unions, firefighters, teachers, police officers, and so on. This is where the candidates largely get their money. It's through these paths, fundraising for them, raising money on their behalf. There are about 4,600 PACs that are registered with the Federal Election Commission. They are required by law to register with the Commission so we know who's out there, what they're campaigning for, and who's funding it. There is some transparency in the money. If you donate to a candidate, you are required by law to identify who you are, so your name, where you work, and your occupation. They can know a teacher's donating here, or firefighters, or corporate workers. Most candidates want that PAC funding. They don't want to have to raise the money themselves. The exception to that rule is Bernie Sanders. In 2016, he actually managed to raise about $1 billion from individual contributions. And $850 million of that came from small contributions. $25, $50, $100. So he proved that you can fund a campaign with individual contributions. But it's a lot of work. Most politicians would rather let the political action committee do the work for them. There are some political action committees that engage in what's called dark money. In a 501c4, this is a politically active non-profit organization. They are not required by law to disclose who's donating the money, how much they're donating, or what they do with the money, because of their non-profit status. Now, the 501c4 can't exist to fundraise. But if you set up a 501c4 and you say you're a nonprofit dedicated to increasing voter registration, then any money you get and any money you spend doesn't have to be disclosed. This is where dark money comes into play, where money that we don't know where it's coming from ends up in the election. It's not completely transparent. There's a lot of money that we have no idea where it comes from. Now, on the presidential level, there is what's called public funding. And public funding is available for presidential candidates to raise at least $5,000 and contributions of $250 or less, basically showing that they're not supported by corporations or interest groups. And this funding is available through our taxes. When you file your tax return every year, if you are getting a refund, you have the option to donate up to $3 out of that return as an individual, and $6 if you're married. If you choose that option, you can donate to the presidential public campaign fund. Now, if a candidate does accept public funding or matching funds, they cannot spend more than a little over $48 million in that election. Because of course we don't want them spending hundreds of millions of our tax dollars on a campaign. So they are restricted in the amount they can spend. And it's rare for a candidate to accept this. Usually a candidate will accept matching funds if they know they're just not going to have money to put into the election. But most candidates choose not to accept matching funds. And that's because there's no restrictions on how much they can spend. So in 2008, John McCain accepted matching funds and could only spend $48 million. Barack Obama did not accept matching funds and could spend $600 million. So for candidates, it's not in their best interest to accept the matching funds because they don't want to be outspent 10 or 15 times their opponent. They're not going to accept these restrictions. But the idea is at least it's there for a candidate who wants it. There's also no real rules about the money candidates can contribute themselves. Now, if they accept matching funds, they can only spend $50,000 of their own money. If they don't accept the matching funds, they can spend millions of their own money. Ross Perot did that in 1992 and 1996. He was a third-party candidate, and because he was a billionaire, he could afford to spend millions of his own money on an election. Trump and Clinton did the same thing in 2016. Sometimes they need to do it for two reasons. One, to get their campaign off the ground, right? You need to hire a campaign manager right away, publicity, and so on. You may need to spend some money to get your campaign launched. And usually in the last 2 to 3 weeks of an election, there's donor fatigue. People are tired, they don't have the money, it's getting down to the wire. So sometimes to keep their campaign going, candidates have to kick in their own money to fund a last-minute ad campaign or YouTube spot. Sometimes it's necessary to get their campaign going and to keep it going. It's not uncommon for candidates to spend their own money. And if they don't accept the matching funds, they can spend as much as they have. Okay, any questions so far? Any questions online? So, how is it that people decide to vote, right? What goes into their decision-making process? Part of it is partisanship. In the less visible races, like state judiciary, city council, school board, you vote along party lines. There's not as much information about the candidates. So people will vote strictly Democrat, Republican, or occasional Libertarian. That's some of how they decide. It's just based on party. They can also vote based on policy. You want a candidate whose views reflect your own, right? You want a candidate who's going to talk about the state of the economy, or abortion, or healthcare. Some of it is which candidate's views line up with my own. It's never going to be a perfect match. But if one candidate matches your views more than the other, that can help you decide how to vote. And there's two different types of voting that we tend to see. Prospective voting is where you're voting based on what you think the candidate will do when they're in office. This is pretty common when there's no incumbent. So in 2008, Obama talked about the need for change. Change and hope, change the status quo. The voters in 2008 were voting for Obama on the basis of how's he going to fix the economy? How's he going to fix healthcare? In prospective voting, you're trying to imagine what the candidate will do and then voting based on that. With retrospective voting, this is common when there is an incumbent because you're rating how they did in office. Are you happy with the performance they've given? So, when Obama was running for re-election in 2012, he focused on a message of stay the course, keep the economy going, and so on. So with retrospective voting, for example, this year, people are looking at what President Trump has done in office. Are they happy? Unhappy? How are they feeling? Right? They're voting based on what the candidate has done. So sometimes you're voting based on what you think they'll do. Other times you're voting based on what they've actually done. And the economy can also come into play. If the economy is doing well, the party in power tends to stay in power. If it's not doing well, then the party usually loses. We saw this happen in 2008. The collapse of the economy led to the voters pushing Republicans out of office. Democrats taking control of the White House, the House, and the Senate. So the economy can be a major factor. And sometimes it comes down to something as simple as their personal characteristics. Religion, gender, ethnicity, geography, and so on. Sometimes you feel a connection with a candidate who grew up without money, who may have also grown up without opportunities. Or sometimes you're thinking, you know what, it would be nice to see the first female vice president, to have Hispanic, Latino representation. Sometimes it's just, I really don't like the other guy, right? Sometimes it's just, this person sucks, they gotta go. It doesn't have to be logical. I mean, sometimes voting just isn't logical. I have a good friend who's a Republican. And we were talking the other day, and he said that he liked Joe Biden, that Kamala Harris gave him a headache. That something about her just gave him a headache. Like, there's no real logic behind that feeling. It's the way he feels, right? So then he's trying to decide, well, which way am I going to go? I don't necessarily like her, but I don't necessarily like the other side. So which way do I go? Like, sometimes you're just like, I'm gonna punch that guy in the face. I'm not voting for him. Right? It's not logical. It can be emotional. Right. Everybody let out a great big groan because we do have to talk about it. 2016, right? The election that makes me want to bring a bottle of tequila to class. Okay. All right, this was a pretty damn ugly election. And it didn't help that both parties were dealing with some pretty serious infighting. With the Democrats, Clinton was supported by the older, more established voters. The younger voters were overwhelmingly supporting Bernie Sanders. He won more votes of people under 30 than Clinton and Trump combined. Unfortunately, because younger voters don't show up in as large a number, that was part of the reason why Sanders was not the nominee. The other part of the problem was the party leadership bias towards Hillary Clinton. Traditionally, the role of the Democratic National Committee is to stay the hell out of the way until the primaries are over. That didn't happen in 2016. The head of the committee, W11 Schultz, very clearly favored Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders. And Donna Brazile, who was part of the DNC, leaked some of the debate questions to Hillary Clinton ahead of time. That's a big no-no. That was a big problem. And Hillary Clinton didn't have enough delegates to get the nomination until 6 weeks before the convention, and really only because of the superdelegates. We had a lot of very angry Democrats saying Hillary Clinton didn't win the nomination, it was given to her, right? It wasn't a fair process. And the Republicans, well, their primaries kind of resembled a three-ring circus. You got 17 candidates running. And all that does is fracture the vote. So Donald Trump ended up being the nominee because he won more votes in the primaries, but he also had more votes against him than any candidate in history. Because there were so many candidates running, he ended up being the last man standing. I really do think if it had been maybe 4 or 5 candidates, he wouldn't have gotten the nomination. But he just happened to benefit from the fact that there were too many people running and it was too fractured, and oh well, he gets it. He's the first major party candidate since 1940 that has never held political office or served in the military. The last president we had that didn't have political experience was President Eisenhower, but he had served in the military, was a general, and had some political experience dealing with politics and leadership during World War II. So he had some understanding of politics. So for good or bad, Trump this is his first political position. And unfortunately, in some ways, he is divisive in the party. Some of the comments he made about his opponents were way out of bounds, right? Calling Ted Cruz's wife ugly. What does she have to do with anything, right? She's not running. Don't go after the family. So he ended up not getting endorsed by some of the party elites. Usually, the people who run against the eventual nominee will endorse them at some point. Some of the Republican candidates refused to do so. John Kasich wouldn't endorse Trump. So neither candidate was really well liked by their parties. Both of them had their fair share of controversies getting to the 2016 election. And it was interesting because one of my alma maters, Western Illinois University, has a mock election every 4 years. Up to 2016, they had gotten every single election right. What went wrong? Some people voted for Bernie Sanders. So they said the nominee is going to be Bernie Sanders and he's going to win. Oops. Right, they were close, they just didn't get there. So, first time in history they've been wrong. Tells me something. Okay. In 2016, we had the two most disliked candidates in modern history. Not exactly something we should be proud of, right? Oh, yay, we picked the two worst candidates we probably could. And obviously there were problems on both sides. With Donald Trump, it was the accusations of sexual assault, right? A couple of claims of rape, the infamous grab them by the you-know-what tape that came out, right? Not exactly very presidential. Hillary Clinton, there was all those questions about her use of a private email server during her time as Secretary of State. Now, she was not the first Secretary of State to use a private server, but they had to make sure that the server was secure enough that someone could not hack in and steal top secret information. There were concerns that her server was not strong enough to prevent someone from breaking into it. And there was also concern about the role of the State Department when our embassy was attacked in Benghazi, Libya in 2011. The ambassador to Libya was killed in the attack, and there were a lot of questions of did the State Department mishandle information? If they didn't know about it, why weren't they better prepared? She ended up having to testify before Congress and explain, why the State Department didn't predict that this was going to happen. With Trump, there was also a lot of controversy about his tax returns. Now, presidential candidates are not required by law to disclose their tax returns. Traditionally, however, they do so in the name of transparency. Trump refused to release his tax returns. That led to questions of, is he hiding something? What is he hiding? Why won't he do it? Of course, we have seen some of the information about his taxes. About how he only paid $740 in taxes one year. Concerns that he may have leveraged his property to fund the 2016 election. No real complete bombshells from the tax returns yet. We're getting a little bit more information. And then we had the role of what's known as an October surprise. Presidential candidates don't want some kind of bombshell explosion super close to the election that could change the outcome. Right? So neither side wants to have an October surprise. In 2016, the October surprise really hurt Hillary Clinton. Because 11 before the election, the FBI opened its investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails. Now, they did this because she had an advisor, Huma Abedin, who was married to former Congressman Anthony Weiner. And Weiner had been arrested for sexting underage girls. At one point, the married couple had shared a laptop, and there were concerns that the congressman had been looking at confidential emails that only his wife should have had access to. So they seized the laptop, they were looking at it, and they didn't find anything suspicious. This is a clear case of the FBI being damned if they did and damned if they didn't. They don't reopen the investigation, Hillary Clinton wins, they later find out she broke the law. That's a problem. To reopen the investigation, people think well, there has to be something serious here, and he possibly changed the outcome of the election. They didn't really have a choice, but it was pretty bad timing, all things considered. Right, so what were we looking at in terms of what happened? It's a little under 59% voter participation, a little lower than usual because people didn't like candidates. There were a lot of moderates who stayed home on election day because they just didn't stomach the idea of voting for either candidate. Youth voter turnout was 50%. That's not surprising given that neither candidate really spoke about the issues young people were facing. There wasn't much discussion about college tuition, or student loans, or healthcare. They were kind of ignored in the election. Donald Trump managed to get 90% of registered Republican votes. They did not cross party lines. They may not have liked him, but they did vote for him. So they didn't cross party lines like there was some thought it might happen. He got 81% of the evangelical vote because of Mike Pence. Evangelicals were lukewarm on Trump, but when he brought in Mike Pence, they got on board with his campaign. He got 81% of the conservative vote, again, largely because of Mike Pence. 67% of whites with no college degree. Clinton got 71% of non-white college graduates, 54% of the women's vote, and 75% of non-whites without a college degree. The question the voters were facing is, do you want change, or do you want someone with experience and leadership? For voters who wanted change, 83% of them voted for Trump. For voters who wanted someone with experience, 90% voted for Hillary Clinton. What ended up happening in the end is people wanted change more than they wanted experience. It didn't matter to them that Donald Trump had never served in political office. They were tired of politics as usual, of Washington insiders. Trump's promise to drain the swamp really spoke to people. Right? They were tired of the same Washington insiders running for election time and time again. They didn't want another Clinton in the White House. They were tired of the idea of American dynasties. It's why Jeb Bush didn't get very far in the Republican primaries. They said, we've had 2 Bush presidencies, we're done. Right? We don't want a Clinton, and we don't want another Bush. Part of it was just the fact that people looked at her and said, she's got too much baggage. We just can't do this. Okay, prior to election day, we kept hearing Hillary Clinton's going to win, right? Hillary Clinton's going to win. Hillary Clinton's going to win. I woke up on election day and I was like, I don't think this is going to go the way they think it is, right? And it didn't. What the hell happened, right? Why were the polls so wrong? Why were they saying she's going to win when she didn't? There's a couple of different factors that came into play. While the economy was doing better, there's still some insecurity, especially amongst blue-collar workers. When Clinton talked about switching away from coal to renewable energy, coal miners felt like their jobs might be threatened, like they might be out of work. So they were worried about tech jobs and others being exported. So for some voters, they just weren't sure that the economy would do well under a Clinton administration. The polls also didn't include enough non-college educated whites, independent voters, first-time voters. And to be quite blunt, people lied in the polls. People lied. They didn't see it as acceptable to say they were voting for Trump. They lied. They said, I don't know, or I'm voting for Clinton. Right? Some of it was just the fact that people lied in the polls. Which is why I'm hesitant to trust some of the polling information we're seeing now. Like, you guys could be making the same mistakes again. I'm a little hesitant to believe that they're completely accurate. Also, the expectation that Republicans might cross party lines didn't happen. Straight ticket voting was higher. Republicans stayed loyal to the party. They did not cross party lines. So Trump won because even though some Republicans didn't necessarily like him, they did vote for him. And they did vote for Republicans at the House and Senate level. So they gave the White House to the president and allowed Republicans to hold on to the House and the Senate. That crossing of party lines didn't happen. Also, and I cannot emphasize this last point enough, they really overestimated female support for Clinton. There was this weird belief that women would vote for Hillary Clinton because she was a woman, which is insulting, right? It's like, okay, yeah, what, because we're all women, we're going to support another woman? No, that's absurd. Like, why would you even think that? They just had this idea that women were going to vote for Clinton. And yeah, but not necessarily. And part of it is also, for some women, they looked at it and they said, I want a female president, but I don't want her. Right? She wasn't very well liked. There were some women who said, why couldn't it have been Elizabeth Warren or someone else, just not her. And it didn't help in the primaries when Madeleine Albright made the comment to Democratic women who were voting for Bernie Sanders that there's a special place in hell for women who don't support each other. Basically saying that female Sanders supporters were not feminists. As you can imagine, that did not go over well, right? There were a lot of women who responded with, don't you dare tell me how to vote. Who the hell do you think you are to call me a bad feminist, right? Don't you ever do that. So it didn't go very well. This idea that women would vote for Clinton because she was a woman was stupid in the first place and clearly didn't play out. It's just frustrating to see that. It's like, not assuming women are going to vote based on gender. That's not how that works. Okay. What happened in the post-2016 environment? Well, President Trump has appointed 2 Supreme Court justices and is close to appointing his 3rd. This is exceedingly rare in the first term of a presidency. You might get 1 Supreme Court opening. They almost never get 2, and it's exceedingly rare to get 3. Most presidents don't get to reshape the court the way they want to. This is an exception to the rule. There were attempts to repeal the Affordable Care Act. It hasn't succeeded for two reasons. One, Republicans have not come up with a better plan, or a cohesive plan. And two, Republicans in Congress have been told by their constituents, I don't like the Affordable Care Act, but I don't want to lose my health insurance. So don't get rid of the ACA until you have a better plan. Don't dump me onto a broken healthcare system. So for some of the Republicans, they said, look, my constituents are telling me not to vote yes on this, and so I can't do it, right? Unless you come up with a cohesive plan, it's not going to work to dump 30-something million people back onto the home market. There's also, of course, been issues with the construction of more of a wall along the border, issues with it cutting through wildlife sanctuaries, and my personal favorite, the destruction of indigenous American graveyards and territories to build the wall because they haven't been screwed over enough as it is, right? Let's just continue to screw them over. Also, the issues of the cost of that. Yeah. Obviously, this is still a fairly contentious area. And after the election, there was some fighting in the Democratic Party. Progressives like Bernie Sanders and others started to be more vocal, but the party chose another moderate to head it up for the next two elections. So whether or not the party stays more moderate is going to depend on the outcome of this election. If Biden loses, then the progressives will rightfully be able to say, look, we did it your way, we moved to the middle, it didn't work, so stop cutting us out of the conversation. There's also, of course, anger over the fact that the winner of the popular vote is not the president. Voters tend to forget about the Electoral College until it actually changes the outcome of the election. Right? They're like, oh yeah, that thing, whatever. Oh wait, what the hell just happened? There were also concerns about the number of false news stories, like Hillary Clinton had cancer even though she legitimately had pneumonia and collapsed in 100-degree heat at the 9/11 memorial, right? Pizzagate and all sorts of weird information. Now, Facebook and Twitter are trying to crack down on that. They actually deleted a tweet from a White House staffer saying masks don't cut down on COVID. They've actually started deleting some of them. They're not going to be able to filter out absolutely everything, but they're making an effort a little bit. The reality is that money still has a great influence on representation, right? It was two millionaires running for president, so either way, we were going to end up with someone wealthy in the White House again. Congress is still dominated by millionaires. Money does still use serving in high office. It's unfortunate, but it is still a problem that we have to deal with. So the most recent election, of course, was 2018, midterms. There was a bit of what's called a blue wave, which is where Democrats come out to vote in large numbers. In that, Democrats did take back control of the House of Representatives, and Nancy Pelosi became Speaker of the House again. They didn't take back control of the Senate. In fact, they lost a couple of seats Although in Florida, that election was definitely irregular. There's definitely some issues with how that election went. But nonetheless, we do have a divided Congress. We have a Democrat-controlled House, Republican-controlled Senate, and nothing getting done. On the plus side, we saw the highest number of female candidates running and the most women in Congress at any time in our history. We are seeing more women running for office this time around as well. And hopefully we'll see more women winning office again this time, and it'll be a pattern that continues. So it was a positive sign that more women were running and winning for election. We also had the highest voter turnout since 1966 at about 47–48%. That's still really low, but it's better than most midterms where we see 35–38%. Part of that was because of a lot of anger about the 2016 election. People wanting to change Congress. So some of that was voter anger. People kicked off about 2016 saying, I'm not blowing it, I'm voting in 2018. In some states, voter turnout was up because of ballot initiatives. In California, there was a referendum to ban the death penalty. It failed. Basically, right now, there's no death penalty because the governor put a moratorium on it. We haven't executed anyone since like the early 90s anyway, so it's kind of a moot point in California. Technically, it still exists, it's just not carried out. In some areas, they did increase the minimum wage. Los Angeles County, it's now $15 an hour as the minimum wage. You can't live there on less than $15 an hour. In terms of marijuana, Michigan voted to legalize medicinal marijuana. Massachusetts made recreational marijuana legal. We're starting to see that being expanded as well. And in Florida, they passed a constitutional amendment for their state that gives felons the right to vote once they've completed their probationary/parole period. So those do tend to get voters out to the polls because they have strong feelings one way or the other. So there's a lot of important elections, and so people showed up in 2018. We are seeing fairly high voter turnout, early voting. Texas has already had 4 million people early vote. They lead the nation in the number of people who have already voted, which is a pretty good sign. And it depends on where you are, how long you have to wait. My parents and older sister are in San Antonio, and they waited an hour and a half, which actually isn't bad. In some places, people have waited 5 hours or 11 hours to early vote. So people are taking this seriously, right? We are seeing people showing up to vote. Partly because of the pandemic, but it is interesting that 4 million people have already voted in Texas. It's pretty significant. So we'll have to see what happens in this election, right? If people show up, how many people vote early, and so on. It's also significant that the Supreme Court deadlocked on the issue of counting ballots that arrive late. In Pennsylvania, the Democratic Party had pushed for ballots to be counted as late as November 6th, if they arrive after Election Day. The Republican Party tried to say, we can't do that, and the Supreme Court tied 4-4 and sent it back to the lower court that said, because of the issues with the Postal Service and the overwhelming number of mail-in ballots, you can wait a couple of extra days, right? Because if you vote and you send in your ballot and it doesn't get there on Election Day, why shouldn't your vote be counted? Right? It's not your fault if the post office doesn't get it there on time. You made the effort. So that's important for 2 reasons. One, to make sure people's votes get counted. And 2, in all likelihood, that means we really won't know who won on election night. Some states won't be able to finish counting for a couple of days. Okay, any questions on that? Okay. So you all online, you're not going to be able to see what I'm drawing on the board, but I'll try to talk loudly enough so you can hear this. So we talked a little bit last time about the Electoral College, right? So with the Electoral College, you need there's 538 electors. Okay. So there's 538, right? For a candidate to win, they have to get 270 out of 538 electoral college votes. Right? A simple majority. What happens if there's a tie? Right? Let's say Trump gets 269 and Biden gets 269. Right? Neither candidate gets to 270. If this happens, if there is a tie in the Electoral College, it doesn't go to the popular vote. Instead, it goes to Congress. So if there was a tie, the House of Representatives would pick the president, and the Senate would pick the vice president. It still wouldn't go back to the popular vote. Okay? Let me ask you guys this. Does that seem fair? Yes. Okay. If we get rid of the Electoral College, we just scrap it all together and go with a straight popular vote? It's also for you guys online. The question is, should we get rid of the Electoral College? Okay, Eileen, you think we should? Okay. It's a complicated question, I realize, and there's no right or wrong answer. I'm just curious. Do you think it should be a straight popular vote? Maybe? Right, so here's the advantages and disadvantages, right? The biggest advantage is people would show up to vote, right? Because right now, they look at it and they say, my vote doesn't matter because it's the Electoral College. If you get rid of it, people do have more of an incentive to vote. Also, when you break this down, essentially what it means is 1% of the population picks the president for 300 million people. It's not exactly an ideal situation. The disadvantages are, one, you could still have a president elected by less than the majority of the population. Bill Clinton got 43% of the popular vote in 1993, but still won, right? So we could have a president who's less than 51% of the popular vote. Because they got the most votes, they're the president. The other potential disadvantage is vote hacking, right? How do we prevent people from trying to change the election results if it's a straight popular vote election? There will definitely be attempts to interfere in the election, right? We saw some of that in 2016. How would we prevent that if it was a straight popular vote? It'd be tricky. It'd be tricky. I'm not sure how we could guarantee a completely tamper-free election. But the other argument you can make, of course, is that out of all of the elections we've had, we've only had 4 or 5 elections where the winner of the popular vote is not the president. The Electoral College works most of the time. It's just getting a lot more attention now because this was the second election in 16 years where the winner of the popular vote was not the president. Right, so people are paying more attention to it now because this has happened twice in a century already. which isn't exactly ideal. So, with all that in mind, do you think we could just do a straight popular vote instead? Would that be better? Maybe. So, who do you think's going to win? Right? Yeah, I'm asking you to make a prediction. Clearly, I have no idea, but out of curiosity, who do you think's going to win? Think Trump's going to win? Definitely a possibility, yeah. Anyone else? Any of you online have an idea about who might win the election? I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to depend on two factors. One, how are people feeling about the economy, right? It's not in great shape, it has been worse. And two, how do people feel about how the government's handled the pandemic? For some people, they're going to say they've done an absolutely fabulous job, that's it. And for others, they're going to say this totally sucks. So I think those are maybe the two factors that will make a difference in who wins. How are we feeling about the economy? How are we feeling about the pandemic? So, yeah. I don't think we'll know on election night who won. I think there's going to be some states that are still receiving ballots, and unless it's a landslide one way or the other, we're not going to know who won on that night. I think most people will go to bed and be like, all right, we have no idea who won, we'll pick this up tomorrow. And the day after that, and the day after that, and the day after that. This can be similar to the 2000 election, the idiotic ballots in Florida, but hopefully it won't take the Supreme Court telling us who won the election, although that is also a distinct possibility. You guys ready for this election to be over? It's like I don't care anymore, let's just get it done. Yeah. Yeah. I can't say I blame you. I think a lot of people are feeling that way. They're just looking at it and they're like, are we done yet? Are we done yet? It is an interesting sign, though, that people are early voting. It could be good for election day, and that could also be bad. It's going to depend. Hopefully, there's no issues with the early voting, but I don't know if you guys are aware of what's happening in California with the polling drop-off. So there's official drop-off places for mail-in ballots, and they'll say like official drop-off box, no tampering, whatever. For some reason, the state Republicans have been setting up unofficial drop-off boxes that convince people that it's safe to drop off their ballot there, even though it's not an official drop-off box, which means their vote probably won't get counted. The state courts have said to the Republican Party leadership, knock it off and take these drop boxes down. And so far they have refused. It may take a federal court stepping in and saying, what are you doing? Knock it off. Not a good sign, right? You don't want people trying to tamper with the election. And then we had in Florida, in a polling place, the people who are working there are not allowed to be wearing any kind of campaign gear or actively campaigning for one candidate or another, because this could be seen as an attempt at voter intimidation. They can't wear pins or buttons or anything like that. There's a police officer in Florida who is wearing a MAGA hat, and it's like, you can't do that. On your off time, you're free to wear whatever you want. Working in a polling station, you know it's illegal, and you still did it anyway. Isn't that good? Right? We don't need to have this happening. There was a poll worker in another state who was denying people the right to vote if they were wearing Black Lives Matter material. Voters can wear whatever they want. Only the people inside the polls can't. So you can't deny someone the right to vote because they're wearing a MAGA hat or Black Lives Matter hat. So this is going to be one very bizarre election. And there may be multiple lawsuits in multiple states with accusations of voter suppression. So I think it's going to make 2016 look like a fairy tale by the end of this. I'm hoping I'm wrong. I don't think it's going to be pretty. I think it's going to be bad. Any thoughts, comments? Yeah. It's just not going to be pretty. Okay. Thursday, we're going to talk about interest groups. So read chapter 11 for Thursday. If you watch the debate Thursday night, you can get extra credit. You just have to write something up for me, and you'll get extra credit. If you have any questions between now and Thursday, of course, you can email me or call or text my phone. So stay safe, and if you haven't voted, maybe go ahead and vote now. That way